You're listening to the Other Realm Podcast, a podcast of the supernatural and other paranormal phenomena, with your host, Xander Scullion.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Other Realm Podcast. And I want to say I hope you guys are having a wonderful morning, a great afternoon, or maybe a fabulous evening, whichever time you guys are listening to this. And some of you guys may recognize my voice, or you guys might know me from Facebook. I do a lot of stuff on video games. I have a podcast and a YouTube channel on that, which I will get to towards the end of this program, because this podcast is going to be focusing on nothing more than paranormal and other ghost phenomena. And this is something I've wanted to do for quite some time, because ever since at a young age, I've had my own ghost experiences, and this episode is going to be focusing a lot on ghost stories that's happened in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm going to be talking about a mysterious light that goes up and down railroad tracks called the Mako Light, the legend of the Mako Light. And I will also be talking about a little favorite spot in downtown Wilmington on Front Street, where even if you feel like you're alone, there's someone might be drinking right next to you. That's going to be the Blue Post Haunting. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is, of course, the Mako Light. For over a century, mysterious lights have been bobbing up and down along the railroad tracks near Mako Station, a few miles west of Wilmington. When anyone approached the lights, they would disappear. The lights were observed many times over many years, and even photographed on occasion. It's even said that President Cleveland saw the lights while on a whistle-stop tour in 1889. The source of these lights were never determined, but according to the legend, the lights is the ghost of a railroad worker who died on the tracks one night in 1867. On that tragic night, a train was rolling along the tracks, and the signalman, Joe Baldwin, was sleeping in the caboose. Joe's slumber was broken by a violent jerk. A veteran railroad worker, Joe Baldwin, recognized the motion and immediately knew that the caboose had become detached from the rest of the train. Joe Baldwin's heart started racing. He knew that his one car was now stuck on the tracks, and that the main part of the train was rapidly moving away from him, and he had no way of connecting it. Joe also knew that he wasn't the only train scheduled for those tracks that night, and a passenger train was due along soon. And if the oncoming train struck the stalled caboose, that would be a horrible accident. Now, Joe Baldwin had a choice to make. He knew that he had to signal the oncoming train to stop, and he knew the only way to do this was to be sure the engineer in the approaching train would see the signal was to stand on the platform at the back of the caboose. Joe Baldwin also knew that it takes a long time for a speeding train to stop, and even if the engineer saw the light and stopped, there would be no time for it to slow down to prevent a complete disaster. But the chances were good that the caboose would be still hit, and Joe Baldwin knew that this was going to happen. He didn't stand much of a chance of walking away from that crash. Baldwin made a heroic choice. Grabbing his lantern, Joe Baldwin stood on the back of the caboose as the sound of the oncoming passenger train rumbled closer. Joe frankly waved his light, trying to desperately catch the attention of the engineer. Now, Joe's plan worked, and the engineer on the oncoming train saw the light and pulled hard on his brakes, and the momentum of the tons of speed of steel kept the train moving, and the locomotive slammed into Joe's caboose. Joe's signal had worked, but his bravery had prevented a more serious collision. But brave Joe Baldwin was decapitated in the crash. Joe's head was thrown by the force of the accident into the murky swamps that surrounded the tracks, and it was never found. His headless body was buried with the hero's honors a week later. Ever since that night, lights have been seen moving up and down the track around Mako. Sometimes it's only one light, sometimes it's two. People say it's the ghost of Joe Baldwin still searching for his missing head. Now, here is a note about the story. The Mako Light has been seen over 100 years, but has not been seen since 1977. This was the year that the railroad tracks at the Mako station was pulled up, and Mako actually stands on top of a geological fault line. and some have said that the source of the light is a static electricity produced by the pressures of this fault building up along the tracks. Now, I personally have never seen the Mako light, but I have heard this story from relatives and other people who have said they've seen this light, but the light has actually not been seen since the 70s, and there's been a lot of construction since then, and the railroads that Baldwin used to haunt are no longer there, so maybe Baldwin had finally found some peace. And speaking of peace, I think all of us, after a long work week, after, maybe a lot of drama or something like that, a lot of us like to go to bars and kind of relax and kind of unwind, maybe mingle, maybe talk to some new people. Well, that can also be a doorway for ghosts as well. A lot of people, when they think about ghost sightings, they think of cemeteries and graveyards, or maybe old abandoned buildings. But really, sometimes your local pub or bar, especially if it has a history, can be a very haunted place, because ghosts are a lot like us. They were people once, and if you enjoy drinking, you enjoy being around people, who's to say you wouldn't do this in the afterlife? And that brings me to my next story, and that is the Blue Post of Wilmington, North Carolina, a very popular tavern. In historic downtown Wilmington, North Carolina, there's a waterway that connects the city with a nearby ocean coast, and right by the riverfront lies an alley, no wider than the sidewalk, paved with brick. The stone buildings are boarded up and locked and have not been used in almost 400 years. But back in those days, when pirates could enter the city with secret tunnels and chambers, this silver of streets was called Paradise Alley, and the windows were wide open, with women soliciting flesh and booze from the Blue Post Tavern. Now, Blue Post was owned by Gellius Meg, a 6-foot-tall woman weighing 350 pounds. Gellius Meg had traveled the 7 seas herself. You could tell with all the tattoos on her beefy arms and imposing frame. She was known as ruling the tavern with an iron fist, literally. When someone got a little too rowdy, maybe someone would flip a table, or someone would pull out a knife on a fellow customer, or maybe they would get nasty with one of the girls. Gellius Meg would scale her bar, grab the offender by the throat, and she would dangle them over her head like a rogue on the gallows and throw them out of Blue Post. Now, this wasn't the only thing that she would do. While they were laying on the streets of Paradise City, she was known of wrapping her teeth around the ear of the offender and ripping it from his head, leaving him just to lay there on the brick ground. Now, as the ear was dangling in her mouth, she would throw it into a giant pickle jar that was full of other ears, fingers, and other appendages displayed on the bar to remind people they need to behave. Now, this went on for some time, and a lot of people were tired of being tortured, and the local sailors decided to teach Gellius Meg a lesson louder than a simple boycott. They banded together with the shadows of Paradise Alley and waited for Blue Post owner to close for the night. After she shut the door, they pounced her with clubs, knives, rifle butts, and chains. And she put up a really good fight, but after a long gruesome brawl, the giant woman finally succumbed and fell to the ground and was continuously beaten until she died. And the terror had ended, at least for that era. Now, people to this day still say they can feel the presence of Gellius Meg, especially in Blue Post. I've known people who's accidentally, in their drunken state, went into the women's bathroom and have felt hands on their throats. I've also heard stories of bartenders that's worked at Blue Post that's, maybe they felt a hand brushed against them, and a lot of stuff has happened in Paradise Alley. And I've been to Blue Post quite a bit. It's actually one of my favorite bars in downtown Wilmington. I mean, now it's really nothing like that, of course. I mean, they have stuff like a skee ball, arcade tables. It's kind of like a barcade now. But it's funny to think that this, adult playground that's pretty much like an adult Chuck E. Cheese used to be adult in so many other ways. And downtown is full of that kind of history, and I'm definitely going to be touching base on that in future episodes, talking about historic downtown Wilmington and other parts of Wilmington, because the place has been around for a long time. Wilmington's been invaded twice, once during the Revolutionary War and the second during the Civil War with Fort Fisher. And I've actually got some personal ghost stories with Fort Fisher that we'll get into as well. Now, what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to talk about a personal ghost story of mine. Now, this is when I was in high school. I think I was around 14 or 15 years old, and my mom actually used to work for a cemetery. She was a funeral director and a family counselor. And I remember it was a Sunday, and we would, even to this day, me and my mom, we always spend a Sunday together. We'll go out to eat, and, we'll go shopping or do something like that. And I remember I was hanging out with her, and I was like, you know what, I want to hang out, get some food. I think I wanted to go buy a new video game or something like that. But before we started doing any of this, she had a funeral she had to prepare for Monday, which means we had to go by Oleander Memorial Gardens, one of the cemeteries that she worked at, and pretty much what she had to do is find the plot of the gravesite that was going to be for that Monday service. So we're walking around, and it's a pretty good sized cemetery. It's not very small, and we were having some troubles even with her map that she had on hand of trying to find the plot. So we ended up going back to the office, and she was going to look in some files and see if she can find some more information. Well, when we walked out of the office, I started hearing bagpipe music. And I was thinking in my head, I'm like, oh man, I love bagpipes. And I loved it so much, I ended up mentioning it to my mom. I was just like, man, I really love these bagpipes. They were playing like Amazing Grace. And I knew there was some churches that were right around. So I was like, maybe some church playing it. I was like, let's, after we find the plot, let's drive around and see if we can, see where this bagpipe's coming from. Now, let's rewind us a little bit. Right before we got to the office, we did see a little boy, probably around 8 or 9 years old, that was walking, and he had one of the plot flags, the little plastic plot flags, in between his fingers, twirling it around while he was walking, and he didn't see us. His back was turned towards us, kind of walking towards the trees. Now, I didn't really think anything of it. I thought maybe, it was a family that came to visit a lost family member, and maybe they brought their son or little brother with them, and, maybe he was wandering off. Well, going back to the bagpipes, when we got back in the car and we were driving down the road, and finally we were looking for this plot, and the bagpipes started getting louder and louder, when all of a sudden we looked over to the right and we saw the kid standing in front of a tree playing the bagpipes. Now, this may not sound that creepy, but what was really weird about it was the fact that the way the kid was looking at us. The kid was looking at us, but he wasn't looking at us. It was almost like he was seeing right through us, standing there playing the bagpipes. And the bagpipes were pretty big. And it's not an instrument that you can just, pull out of your pocket or, sit somewhere. And it was this kind of weird seeing a kid with bagpipes on a Sunday afternoon playing in a cemetery. That was really weird. So once we saw that, even my mom ended up mentioning, because her and I both were very, very quiet, just kind of almost hypnotized by this little boy playing bagpipes. She says, it almost doesn't seem like it's real. And I knew exactly what she meant, and I'm like, yeah, I don't feel this. I feel like this is very surreal. And we ended up actually leaving because we were kind of spooked out by this kid. And again, I'm going to say, to be a skeptic, that maybe it was just some kid who came to the cemetery and decided to play bagpipes, but it was still a very, very eerie experience. And it's one of those things that you can explain the story to someone and they can come up with their own solutions, but being there at that time and having that inner feeling, that standoffish feeling that you had, because I've seen a lot of people play music. I play for bands. I've seen people perform music and stuff like that, but this was something completely different. But yeah, guys, that is a personal ghost story of mine, and I have plenty more. I've had a lot of ghost experiences in my lifetime, and I'm going to be sharing some more of that in the next episode. I'm also going to be sharing more of historic Wilmington hauntings, because there's a lot of history that goes into that. And I would still love to hear some stories from you guys. Either it can be an audio, email, or it can be a written one on otherrealm@mail.com. Now, before I conclude, I will go ahead and plug some of the other stuff I do, and if you guys want to check that out, that's awesome. If you guys love video games, I do have another podcast. It's Excess Gaming Podcast at Podomatic.com, or you can subscribe to us on iTunes. And I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/XanderScullion, and that's mostly all video game related. And this is something completely different, I know, but I know there's some people that, you like ghosts, you might like video games too, so be sure to check that out. And I like I said, I plan on doing some more of this podcast. Be sure to let me know what you guys think about it, and I would love some feedback. Also, next episode I'll be covering sleep paralysis. It's a phenomenon that I've had myself. I had personal experiences with, and I've known some other people that's had it, and it's a very mysterious moment that happens at the moment of waking up. It's very, very crazy. And I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking about some of the myths with it, some of the supernatural elements, and some of the scientific reasons of why we go through this. So maybe if you suffer from sleep paralysis, maybe this would be a way to get out of it. But anyway, guys, thanks for listening. And again, you have any ghost stories, be sure to email us at otherrealm@mail.com. As always, guys, thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll be talking to you guys on the Other Realm.